garden is dark. Only a few olive trees cast any shape against the black, their branches bent low like old men bowing. A man kneels in the dirt. His friends are a few feet away, 3 of them, and they are asleep, heads tilted, breathing slow, while the man in front of them is coming apart. Sweat runs down his face. Not ordinary sweat. Thick, falling in drops, dark enough in the moonlight to look like something else entirely. He has asked his father 3 times now if there is another way. There is not, and he knows there is not. And still he asks. If you had never heard this story before, you would think this is where it ends. A broken man, a silent sky, friends who could not stay awake for even 1 hour. But this is not where the story ends. This is where you and I are going to end up later, after you understand what got him here. Because before this garden, there was a tomb outside a small town called Bethany. Before that, there was a hillside overlooking a city he loved. And somewhere between the two, hidden in a single word most English Bibles translate too gently, a word almost nobody preaches on, there is a 4th time this man wept. Most people who have read this story their entire lives do not know it is there. You will by the end of this video. This is not a story about a miracle, though a miracle happens in it. This is not a story about a sermon, though he preaches one on the way. This is not a story about a crowd, though thousands will follow him and then abandon him in the same week. This is a story about tears. 4 separate times the Son of God wept, out loud or in silence, and what each one tells you about the kind of God you're actually dealing with. Because here is what surprises most people the first time they hear it. The God of the universe, the one who spoke light into darkness, who set the stars in place with a word, did not come to earth immune to grief. He came to earth and cried in front of witnesses more than once. If you've ever felt embarrassed by your own tears, you're about to meet a God who wasn't. And the question worth asking, the one you're going to carry through this entire video, is simple. Why would a God who cannot fail, who knows the ending before the story even starts, bother to weep at all? Stay with me, because the answer starts, strangely enough, at a funeral he was already 3 days late to. Bethany sits less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, close enough that you could walk there before the sun finished setting. It's the kind of town where everyone knows everyone, where 3 siblings, Martha, Mary, and their brother Lazarus, had opened their home to Jesus more than once, feeding him, letting him rest, treating him less like a traveling rabbi and more like family. So when Lazarus falls sick, the sisters do the obvious thing. They send word. Lord, the one you love is sick. That's it. That's the whole message. They don't beg. They don't demand. They trust that love will be enough of a reason for him to come. He doesn't come. Not right away. He stays where he is 2 more days. And by the time he finally starts walking toward Bethany, Lazarus is already dead, already wrapped, already 4 days in a stone tomb, which, in that heat, in that climate, meant something specific to everyone standing there. 4 days was long enough that hope was no longer a reasonable thing to feel. Martha reaches him first on the road before he even enters the village. And what she says to him is not soft. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. It's grief wearing the mask of faith. She believes he could have stopped this, and she's furious. In the quiet, respectful way, people are furious with someone they still love, that he didn't. He tells her Lazarus will rise again. She assumes he means someday, at the end of all things. He means something much sooner. Then Mary comes, And Mary doesn't argue theology with him the way her sister did. Mary falls right there at his feet in front of everyone who followed her out of the house. And she says the exact same sentence Martha said. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Same words, completely different posture. One sister stood and reasoned, the other collapsed and wept. And this is where something happens in Jesus that the text refuses to soften. The Greek word used here, embrymaomai, is not a word for gentle sadness. It's closer to the sound a horse makes when it's agitated, or the low growl before an outburst. Older commentators have translated it as he groaned in the spirit and was troubled. Some newer scholars go further and say the word carries an edge of anger, not gentleness, not sentimental sorrow, something closer to rage, rage at death itself, at what it does to the people he loves, at the wrongness of a world where a good man rots in a tomb while his sisters weep on a public road. He asked them, Lord, where have you laid him? Come and see. And on that short walk, the walk every mourner in Bethany has already taken once that week, something breaks open in him completely. Here's what most people miss about the verse that comes next. It is the shortest verse in the entire Bible. 2 words in English, Jesus wept. But the Greek word chosen there, dakrio, is not the same word used for the loud, public wailing of the mourners around him. There's waklio, the noisy grief of a funeral crowd, professional mourners included, the kind of sound meant to be heard. His was dakrio, quiet, private, tears falling down a face that isn't performing anything for anyone. Think about what that means and imagine standing there yourself. He knows, he has already said out loud that he knows, that in a matter of minutes, he is going to call Lazarus by name and watch him walk out of that tomb still wrapped in burial cloths. He is not weeping because he doesn't know how the story ends. He already knows exactly how it ends, and he weeps anyway. That should stop you. A man who is about to fix the very thing he's crying about it first. Some of the people watching understand exactly what they're seeing. See how he loved him, they say to each other. But not everyone reads it that way. Others in the crowd, colder, ask the obvious cynical question. Could not the one who opened the eyes of a blind man have kept this man from dying? It's a fair question. It's also, in a way, the wrong one, because it assumes his tears were about failure. They weren't. They were about something else entirely, something that has less to do with what he could stop and everything to do with what death costs the people he loves every single time, whether or not he's about to reverse it. He is not crying because he lost control of the outcome. He is crying because death is real and grief is real, and love that doesn't grieve isn't love at all. You know that in your own life, even if no one ever said it to you this plainly before. And then, still with tears on his face, he raises his voice and calls a dead man's name. But that is not the last time he weeps, not even close, because the next time, it isn't for one friend in one tomb. It's for an entire city that doesn't yet know what's coming for it. So sit with that question for a second, because it's the hinge you need to understand before we go further. If Jesus knew with total certainty that he was about to raise Lazarus from the dead, why cry about his death at all? Why not just walk to the tomb, dry-eyed, and do the miracle? Here's the part nobody tells you. The tears at Lazarus' tomb weren't the exception in his story. They were the pattern. Once you know where to look, you start seeing it everywhere. A man who grieves the very things he has the power to undo, because grief was never about his power. It was about his love. Watch for it now, because it's about to get much bigger than one grave in one small town. If you've made it this far, hit subscribe, because what's coming next is the moment Jesus stands on a hillside, looks at an entire city he loves, and weeps out loud for a future that hasn't happened yet. Stay with me, because this next one he saw coming for centuries, and you'll see, by the end of it, why that matters to you too. It's the week everything changes. Crowds are lining the road into Jerusalem, cutting palm branches, throwing their cloaks down in front of a donkey's feet, shouting words from an old psalm, Hosanna, which means literally, save us now. For one afternoon, it looks like a coronation. And then, right at the top of the ridge, where the whole city comes into view for the first time, golden stone, the temple catching the afternoon light, walls that had stood for generations, the procession stops, not because of a threat, not because of an obstacle in the road. It stops because Jesus, the man everyone just called king, is crying. Not quiet tears this time. The Greek word here is kleo, the same loud public weeping used for mourners at a funeral. This is not a man wiping his eyes discreetly. This is audible grief in front of a crowd that came expecting a celebration. Picture yourself in that crowd for a second, cloak still on the ground, palm branch still in your hand, watching the man you just called king fall apart in front of you. And here's what he says through those tears, looking at the city that will, within days, be shouting for his execution. If you, even you, had known on this day the things that make for peace, but now they are hidden from your eyes. He goes on, describing in specific, brutal detail what is coming. Enemies building a barricade around the city, hemming it in on every side, tearing it down, not leaving one stone on another. Pay attention to this, because it's easy to let a prophecy float past you like poetry. It wasn't poetry. It was history. 40 years later, down before in the year 70, Rome came for Jerusalem exactly the way he described. The historian Josephus, a Jewish commander turned eyewitness chronicler of the war, recorded a siege so severe that starvation drove desperate people to unthinkable extremes, and the city's walls and temple were reduced to rubble, almost exactly as Jesus had said on that hillside decades before. Josephus, writing as a Jew who watched his own people suffer this, called it the greatest catastrophe of any city in history, ancient or modern. He was not exaggerating for effect. He was describing what he saw. So when Jesus stood on that ridge and wept out loud, he wasn't performing grief for a crowd's benefit. You need to understand that. He was watching, decades ahead of everyone around him, the exact shape of a coming disaster, and weeping over people who, at that very moment, were cheering his name. Now watch what happens next, because it tells you something about the size of his grief. At Lazarus' tomb, he wept for one family. Here, on this ridge, he weeps for an entire city, a whole generation not yet born, a temple not yet destroyed, a devastation still 40 years away. The stakes have grown from a single household's loss to a nation's future, and you're about to watch them grow one more time, further than you'd expect. And notice this too. The very same crowd waving palm branches and calling him a king will, in less than a week, stand in front of a Roman governor and demand his death. He knows that too. He's not just weeping over a city's distant future. He is, in some sense, weeping over the people who are about to kill him, while they are still cheering. There's one more thing worth noticing before we move forward, and it's the one you've been waiting for since the opening. Every time so far, The story has told you exactly why he wept: a friend's death, a city's coming destruction. The reasons are right there on the page, but there is a third scene coming: his last night of freedom, where the weeping is described so plainly, so briefly, that almost every reader skips past it without noticing it's even there. That's the fourth time, the one hidden in a single word, and it's the heaviest one of all. Now we're back where you and I started: the garden, the dark trees, the three sleeping friends. Only now you know everything that led here. It's the night before his execution, and Jesus takes Peter, James, and John a little further into the Garden of Gethsemane than the others, and he tells them plainly, "My soul is deeply grieved to the point of death." Not sad, not troubled in some mild, manageable way, grieved to the point of death, as if the sorrow itself could kill him before the cross ever does. He goes a little further alone and falls on his face. Here's the fourth time, the one hidden in plain sight, the one almost nobody names when they list the times Jesus wept. It isn't in the Gospel's direct account of that night. It's tucked into a letter written years later, the book of Hebrews, describing this exact scene from the outside. In the days of his flesh, he offered up both prayers and pleas, with loud crying and tears to the one able to save him from death. Loud crying and tears, not implied, not a poetic guess. Stated outright in a single sentence most readers move past on their way to the more famous verses around it. The Greek word behind please is desis, urgent, desperate petition, the kind of asking that comes from someone who is not sure the answer will be yes. And Luke adds a detail so strange that some ancient scribes weren't sure whether to include it. His sweat, under the pressure of that anguish, becomes like drops of blood falling to the ground. Doctors have a name for this now: hematidrosis, a rare condition where extreme stress ruptures the tiny vessels around sweat glands. Whether Luke meant it literally or as the most vivid comparison he had, the point lands the same either way for you and me. This was not composed sorrow. This was a body breaking down under the weight of what was coming. 3 times he asked his father the same question: "If it is possible, let this cup pass from me." 3 times the answer is no. And here is the part worth sitting with. He is not confused about what's ahead. He has already told his disciples in plain language exactly what will happen to him in Jerusalem. He is not weeping from uncertainty. He is weeping with total clarity about exactly what is coming and asking anyway, and then walking toward it anyway. Somewhere near him, Peter, James, and John are asleep. He wakes them once, twice. By the 3rd time, he stops asking them to stay awake at all. "Sleep and take your rest," he tells them, no longer with frustration, more like the exhausted tenderness of someone who has stopped expecting, even if you've never called it by this name. Think of a parent sitting in a hospital waiting room at 2 a.m, already told what the outcome will be, weeping before it happens rather than after, grieving in advance because some griefs are too heavy to wait for. That is close to what's happening in this garden, and it may be closer to something in your own life than you expected when this video started. A grief so total, it starts before the loss even arrives. This is the 4th weeping, the quietest of the 4, and somehow the heaviest, because every other time he wept for someone else's pain. Here, for the only time in the whole story, he weeps for his own. And then he stands up, wipes whatever is left on his face, wakes his friends one final time, and walks toward the men coming through the trees with torches and swords, toward a trial that has already been decided, toward a cross he described to his disciples in detail weeks before it happened. He does not run. He does not ask a fourth time. He goes. So here's what 4 tears spread across one life actually tell you. Take away 1. Jesus' tears were never one emotion wearing different clothes. At a friend's tomb, they were grief tangled with something close to anger at death itself. On a hillside above Jerusalem, they were sorrow for a whole city's coming ruin. In a garden, the night before his execution, they were anguish so complete his body broke down under the weight of it. 4 different tears. 4 different reasons. One man, feeling all of it in full. And you are allowed to feel more than one thing at once, too. Take away. 2. And this one is for you, not just for the story. A God who weeps is a God who does not ask you to explain your grief to make it valid. He didn't need Martha or Mary to convince him Lazarus' death mattered. He didn't need Jerusalem to deserve his tears before he gave them. He didn't need permission from anyone in a garden alone to fall on his face before what was coming. Which means your grief, the kind you've maybe never said out loud to anyone, doesn't need to earn its way into being real either. And takeaway 3, the one worth sitting with longest, the same voice that cried out in that garden 2,000 years ago, urgent and pleading and unheard by the 2 friends sleeping a few feet away, that voice has not gone silent. Hebrews doesn't just tell you Jesus wept once. It tells you he understands permanently what it costs to ask for something and hear no, which means whatever room you're sitting in right now, whatever waiting is breaking you slowly the way that garden broke him, you are not grieving into an empty sky. You never were. Which of these 4 times Jesus wept hit you the hardest? The tomb, the hillside, or the garden? Tell me below. I read every one. Because in the end, this was never a story about a miracle or a sermon or a crowd. It was a story about a God who looked at everything death does to the people he loves, the people you love, and instead of staying dry-eyed and distant, knelt down in the dirt of a garden and wept like it was his own.